Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
You are now listening to Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Every month, Cultural Survival brings you the latest news impacting Indigenous peoples across the globe. This bulletin features important stories from Europe, North, Central, South America, Africa, Asia, and beyond. Starting news from UN. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged the international community to safeguard the rights of indigenous peoples to live in peace and dignity. In his message on the International Day of World's Indigenous Peoples, Guterres highlighted the vital role of indigenous peoples as stewards of biodiversity and guardians of the environment, emphasizing that their survival is crucial for humanity. However, Guterres also warned of the severe challenges indigenous peoples face, including threat to their existence, violence, and the negative impact of extractive industries on their ancestral lands and resources. He emphasized the need to protect their right to self-determination, as enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This year's theme, Protecting the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Voluntary Isolation and Initial Contact, underscores the importance of respecting indigenous peoples' right to protect themselves from unwanted contact, which can have devastating consequences. Guterres called on the international community to support indigenous peoples' right to shape their futures and live in peace and dignity. Now, news from the US. A recent report from the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative has reignited calls for the U.S. government to return lands, once appropriated from native nations for boarding schools, back to the tribes. The report highlights the devastating impact of these schools on indigenous communities and emphasizes the need for restorative action. The Department of Interior is now being urged to facilitate the return of these lands, including the contentious 1,200 acres site in Rapid City, South Dakota, which has been the subject of a decades-long dispute. This land-back effort is seen as crucial for healing the reconciliation, addressing the historical injustices inflicted upon indigenous peoples through the boarding school system. In Canada, as the first Indigenous woman and the first woman over 28 to win Miss Universe Canada, Aisili Kallingbull is making Canadian beauty pageant history. As the Miss Universe Canada pageant winner in 2024, Kallingbull reigned supreme among 64 competitors. Kallingbull will go on to represent Canada at the Miss Universe pageant in Mexico later this year. Aside from her modeling and pageantry, Kallingbull uses her platform to speak out against violence towards indigenous women, advocates for access to clean drinking water, promotes land stewardship, addresses issues within the foster care system, and supports environmental protection. In Australia is currently facing significant challenges in improving the lives of the country's indigenous population. According to a government report released on Wednesday, July 31st, only 5 of 19 measures are on track to meet their targets. Australia has grappled for decades with reconciling with its indigenous population. Despite arriving on the continent 50,000 years before British colonists, indigenous peoples were marginalized during colonial rule and are still at the lower end of the socio-economic ladder in Australia. Now moving to Asia. Starting news from Bangladesh. In a military crackdown following a bank robbery on April 22nd and 23rd, over 100 indigenous Bam people have been arbitrarily arrested in the Chittagong hill tracts of southeastern Bangladesh. The military accuses them of being terrorists and supporters of the Kuki-Chin National Front, the group allegedly responsible for the robbery. Many Bam people have fled their villages, seeking refuge in nearby jungles or by fleeing the country. Amnesty International is calling for the immediate release of all civilians and an end to the crackdown, highlighting the long history of persecution and discrimination against indigenous peoples in Bangladesh. The military has imposed restriction on the Bam community, limiting their food rations and conducting random searches. The crackdown has severely disrupted their livelihoods, particularly their jhum cultivation practices. The military claims the mass arrest will continue until stolen weapons are retrieved. In Nepal, in a landmark decision on July 11, 2024, Nepal officially recognized the Homlo people as an indigenous nationality. This recognition follows an extensive study by high-level expert committee which confirmed the Homlo people's distinct language, cultural practices and historical presence in the Homla district. The Homlo, consisting of 5 groups with a population of approximately 6,000, have historically been excluded from state-provided services due to lack of recognition. This decision grants them legal status and ensures access to state-provided protection and services. The recognition process involves meticulous research into the Homlo's history, language and customs, including their unique Homlo K language and distinct rituals. This landmark decision marks a significant step towards acknowledging and protecting the diverse cultural heritage of Nepal. Now news from Africa, starting from South Africa. On 29th July, 350 years after Kotoa's death, the legacy of a mother figure for many indigenous people of South Africa was celebrated. For the 350th anniversary of her death, a play, poetry, music, dialogue, and exhibitions were used to tell her story as a story of hope. 3 important Krotoa-related sites were visited as part of commemorating her life. Roven Island, where she was banished and died, as well as the Castle of Good Hope, where she was the first buried, and Dai Krutekerk, where she was ultimately laid to rest. Krotoa was a member of the Goringai Kona people, and she was a niece of Atsumau, an interpreter and Khoi leader during the early days of Dutch colonialism. From 1650 to 1660, she served as a servant in the home of Jan van Riebeeck, where she learned Dutch and eventually served as a translator and mediator between the Dutch settlers and the Khoi. Now moving to Guatemala. Indigenous communities in Mario Mendez Montegro microregion of the Saichay have taken decisive action, halting operation of palm oil extraction company TIC Industrias SA. The communities are demanding that the company recognize the long-established right of way through their lines, a right they claim the company has denied since its arrival over a decade ago. The Pico de Oro community, established in 1975, has been leading the charge, demanding recognition of their right of way. Despite promises of dialogue facilitated by Petén Governor Mauricio José Acevedo Sandoval, the company has refused to engage with the communities. In response, several neighboring communities have joined the protest in solidarity, further blocking access to companies' operations. The situation remains tense, with the communities vowing to protest until their demands are met. In Peru, in a landmark legal victory for environmental protection and indigenous rights, a Peruvian court has upheld the recognition of Marañón River as a right-holding entity. This decision, stemming from a lawsuit filed by an organization of indigenous women from the Peruvian Amazon, sets a crucial precedent in the fight against pollutions caused by extractive industries. The initial ruling, issued in March by I Mixed Court of Nauta in the Loreto region, was met with appeals from the Ministry of Energy and Mines and the state-owned company Petroperu. However, in May, the Superior Court of Justice of Loreto upheld, recognizing the river's rights. Final resolution is still pending, but if the ruling is overturned, the case may be taken to the Constitutional Court. The recognition rights of the Marañón River are distinct from property rights associated with resource extraction. Instead, these rights align with the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, which advocates for protecting nature's inherent rights. This groundbreaking decision empowers indigenous communities to protect their ancestral lands and waterways, ensuring a sustainable future for both the environment and its inhabitants. In Mexico, indigenous organizations, collectives, and human rights centers have raised the alarm over the increasing criminalization of indigenous defenders in Mexico. In recent statement, they condemned the arbitrary detention, prolonged pre-trial detention, and excessive sentences imposed on fabricated charges, highlighting a pattern of racism and disproportionate violence by the Mexican state. The criminalization of indigenous defenders is seen as a tactic to suppress struggles for collective rights, impacting not only the individuals and their families, but also the broader enjoyment of their rights for indigenous communities. The collectives urge Mexican authorities to adhere to international human rights standards, release those unjustly imprisoned, and provide full reparation for the damages inflicted. Now, news from Panama. Socio-environmental organizations in Panama have met with Canadian officials to discuss a damning report on human rights abuses during the 2023 protest against a mining contract. The report documents 4 deaths, hundreds of injuries, over 1,500 arbitrary detentions, and numerous cases of activists facing criminal charges. Additionally, the report highlights punitive actions against groups like teachers and union leaders who joined the national strikes. The meeting aimed to address these reported violations and seek a resolution between the involved parties. That is all for this edition of Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Stay tuned for our next broadcast. For more information on the rights of indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook and X.